during this Hanukkah.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to the program. Zev Brenner. Alyza Lewin joins us, President and General Counsel of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. She's a co-founder and partner in Lewin and Lewin LLP, where she specialized in litigation, mediation, government relations. She works with her father, the famous Nat Lewin. So, Alyza, good to have you back again. Thank you for joining us.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Zev.
Thank you. So much to talk about. But since Hanukkah is in the air, and I know that you and your father have especially fought for the right for public menorahs, for menorahs on public property. And now we take it for granted because it's being done. But I understand even the reform movement has finally seen the light as far as putting menorahs on public property. And that's a victory for what you and your father strive for. So tell us about the latest thing for this Hanukkah season, where the reform movement, at least in one part of the country, has really given up and saying, hey, let's go with it.
Yes, that's true. It was a wonderful Hanukkah story in Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts. So last year, Chabad wanted to put up a menorah, and the reform rabbi in the community was not supportive and tried to actually convince the town authorities not to permit the Chabad rabbi to put up his menorah. And so we advised the Chabad rabbi to find a public forum where a space that's used by groups for whether it could be fairs or other public events, because the law, as established by the cases and the oral arguments that my father has had in his cases historically, have established the right of a private organization like Chabad to put up their menorahs in the public forum, in the public space. And he realized that the space adjacent to Plymouth Rock itself had been used for these different festivals and fairs and was indeed a public forum. And so he applied for a permit and was able to, by the last night of Hanukkah last year, to put up for one night his menorah in that space and have a candle lighting there. Well, lo and behold, this year, the reform rabbi in the community decided that she would apply for a permit for all 8 nights of Hanukkah to put up her menorah at the Plymouth Rock location. So she applied and was given that permit and is going to be having her menorah lighting there. So the Chabad rabbi says, that's wonderful, all the more light. And so he now applied for a permit to put up his Chabad menorah in a downtown location in another public forum, and was given that permit. And so now in Plymouth Rock this year, there will be 2 public menorahs, one with the hosted by the Reform rabbi and her congregation, and one hosted by Chabad. So we've gone from 0 to 2 in
Wow.
2 years, which is
That's great. They opposed having menorahs on public property. I never understood why there was such litigation and so vehemence to having Hanukkah menorahs on public property, because I know that Jews, especially in different parts of the country, outside New York, we have so many Christmas symbols. They love to see a menorah. It makes them feel pride, especially during this time of year. So why was there such opposition for some of these secular groups, including some of the reform groups, to having a menorah on public property? I never understood it.
I think their feeling is that it was beginning to encroach on the wall of separation, which they wanted to be an impenetrable wall of separation between church and state. And they felt that putting up Hanukkah menorahs in the public square somehow meant that the government was crossing that line and endorsing religion. And I think it's just like you said. I think it's just the opposite. I think that it's a wonderful thing for us to be able to celebrate the religious diversity in this country, and that at a time where everywhere you go this time of year, you see particularly the Christmas holiday decorations. It's a wonderful thing for Jews to also be able to see their faith represented and have the Hanukkah menorahs in the public square. I think you're right that what it does is it instills tremendous pride and in the Jewish community when they see that.
It makes
So
Jews don't feel as lonely, especially if you're in other
Yeah.
parts of the country where, you can get swallowed up by every television station, every broadcast. You walk down the streets, you see it. So if you see a menorah, it feels good. I know part of it, I think I've spoken to your father, maybe Alan Dershowitz too. Maybe some of them view menorah as a religious symbol and the dreidel wouldn't be religious symbol. Again, I don't see the logic because it's a beautiful thing, and let them have Christmas trees on public property. And as long as we have our menorah, why not?
Well, the menorah is a religious symbol, and you should understand that the
Not the
way we
dreidel, not the
won the legal argument is, and the courts of opinions have held that the menorah is a religion, and it's actually a form of religious speech. And the idea behind the protections in the public forum were that you can't have a public forum where everybody can get up and speak about whatever topic they want, but you're closing it off to only religious speech, right? That is why the Chabad rabbis have an absolute right to put it up, specifically because it is religious speech, and you can't deny them their right and say, oh, all speech is permitted in the public space except religious speech. That would be discriminating based on the viewpoint and the perspective, and you can't do that. So the menorah is recognized as a religious symbol, and we have a right to put it up as religious speech.
Has the menorah wars been pretty much won? Are there still places that give a hard time to putting up?
Every year, this year was no exception.
Oh,
We
yeah,
were
which part of the
contacted by
country?
numerous Chabad rabbis who have been asking for letters and support in different places around the country. One of the recent ones, and we'll see what happens, is actually in Hawaii, where they were asking to put up the menorahs in the airport in Hawaii. I was kind of hoping that that would require a personal visit to go see the airport in Hawaii, but we just sent a letter.
Don't you have to appear in court? Why?
Right. So
But for the most part, they keep on bringing these battles and they keep on losing. So I'm not sure they keep on bothering. It's a waste of public resources. If you know that the precedents in every part of the country, I don't think there's any, forgive me, has there been any cases where the menorah has lost? Menorah has constantly won. So why would they even bother to fight it? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
it's still, you end up with individual municipalities where there are individuals who resist it. Oftentimes what happens is we will write a letter and give them the citations to all the cases that demonstrate why the menorah can go up, why it's constitutional to have it go up. And most times, not all, but most times they'll figure out an arrangement and allow the menorahs to go up. We have not been involved recently in litigation, but there are many municipalities still, new municipalities, where it's something new and they're not comfortable with it.
And it's mostly Chabad who's bringing these lawsuits, correct? Anybody else aside from Chabad?
It's Chabad that is putting up the menorahs. Sure, it's the Chabad menorahs. It's the Chabad shluchim who are who, wherever they are, look for new locations to put up the menorahs.
Now, you're involved in so many different interesting cases. We'll talk about anti-Semitism on campus too. But I've watched the litigation regarding Ben and Jerry's and Unilever and Ben and Jerry's in Israel, right? It's been a whole balagan, and Unilever did the right thing, but the Ben and Jerry's board was not happy with that. They didn't want the unit in Israel to sell Ben and Jerry's, period, because their board is so left-wing and so progressive. Is that they're anti-Israel, which is not a surprise from that particular group. But what's going on? What's the latest salvo?
Yes, we had a tremendous victory against BDS this week. So as you correctly state, what had happened is Ben & Jerry's for almost 35 years has had an individual in Israel, Avi Zinger, who was the one and only licensee in the world to have the license to actually manufacture and distribute Ben & Jerry's ice cream in Israel. He has a factory in Israel, which I was actually fortunate enough to be able to go visit just a few weeks ago.
You sure
And he
doesn't have a branch in Hawaii?
No, it doesn't have a branch in Hawaii, but it has a branch in his factory in Israel. And what he does there is he manufactures the exact same Ben & Jerry's ice cream. He's been doing this for, as I say, almost 35 years. He gets the ingredients from the exact same sources where the Ben & Jerry's in Vermont gets their ingredients. And he was manufacture the same flavors with the same recipes and the same formulas. And what happened a little over a year ago is that the BDS movement really was building up the pressure on the Ben & Jerry's board in Vermont. And the Ben & Jerry's board wanted Avi Zinger to stop distributing his Ben & Jerry's ice cream across the Green Line. And so they were demanding that he stop sales in Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, as they were calling it, or they actually referred to it as the occupied Palestinian territories.
That's what
And Avi Zinger
they called it occupied Palestinian territories?
That's what the board called it. That's what they called it. And he said, I can't do that. He said, first of all, he said that would be forcing me to violate Israeli law, because Israeli anti-discrimination law says very clearly that not only may you not discriminate on the basis of all the general categories that we're familiar with, race, color, national ethnic origin, religion, gender, all of these categories, but the Israeli law also includes residence. And he said, I can't. What he does is he makes these the ice cream, and he distributes it to all the supermarkets around the country, all the mini markets and the gas stations around the country, including in Judea and Samaria, and including actually in Palestinian cities as well. He said, I cannot turn around and say I will stop at the Green Line and I won't distribute it across the Green Line, because that would be a violation of Israeli law and also a violation of the anti-boycott laws. So he refused, and what the Ben & Jerry's board did is they said, well, then we will not renew your license. His license was set to expire at the end of December of this year. That would have meant that he would have been precluded from manufacturing or distributing ice cream anywhere in all of Israel, not just over the Green Line. So we, and this is both Lewin and Lewin and the Brandeis Center, together with Mark Zell, who's an Israeli attorney, we all represented Avi Zinger and brought a lawsuit in March on behalf of Avi Zinger against Unilever, which is the parent company. Ben & Jerry's is a wholly owned subsidiary of Unilever. And we said, as one of the principles of American law is that you cannot, as a condition of a contract, require one party to that contract to do something illegal, to violate the law. And we said that's what Unilever was compelling Avi Zinger to do in order to renew his contract, was they were forcing him to break the law. And Unilever then negotiated a settlement. I was there. I negotiated for Avi Zinger, where what we resolved was that Unilever would sell to Avi Zinger's business the right to sell the Ben & Jerry's ice cream using the Hebrew and Arabic trademarks. So they gave him the Arabic trademarks to be able to continue to sell Ben & Jerry's ice cream, the same Ben & Jerry's ice cream he's been making all along, under those trademarks. That removed the ability from the Vermont board to impact his sale of Ben & Jerry's. They could no longer stop, and the BDS movement was very unhappy because it took away their ability to basically have Ben & Jerry's boycott Israel, to stop the sale of Ben & Jerry's ice cream throughout all of Israel, which is what they wanted. So the board, the independent board members who were committed to the BDS movement, turned around and sued the parent company. Very unusual lawsuit to have a wholly owned subsidiary try and sue its parent. But they brought a lawsuit against Unilever in an attempt to derail the deal that they had negotiated with Avi Zinger and stop them from carrying it out and enabling Avi Zinger to continue selling the Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Well, this week, that lawsuit was settled, and Avi Zinger's deal has not been touched at all. He is still continuing to sell the same Ben & Jerry's ice cream, same sourced ingredients, same recipes, same formulas, with the blessing of Unilever, and he'll be doing that with the Hebrew and Arabic trademarks for years to come.
What about the old
And
fogies
so-
from the Ben and Jerry's board? Are they happy with this? Are they going along with this? Because they try to stop it. They
tried to stop it and they failed. They tried to stop it and they have failed. And
have any other legal
so
recourse? Can they still keep the litigation going, or is it?
they have now withdrawn their complaint. They've ended that lawsuit. I think it's clear because they were not going to. Not only were they not going to be able to stop this transaction, but I think they also realized that in the process, they stood to risk losing any influence that they had. This board is a very unusual creation. When in 2000, when Unilever purchased and merged with Ben & Jerry's, they created this independent board to enable them to have some say in the social mission of the company. At that point, the discussion was about things like what kind of paper would the company use, and would they partner with nonprofit organizations, and nothing to do with, global or how where the ice cream should be sold. I mean, it's rather astonishing to think that the subsidiary could be dictating to Unilever where they're supposed to be selling their products. And so they stood to risk losing their ability to weigh in on anything in this litigation. And so I assume that what they decided to do at the end of the day is give up on trying to overturn or upend the deal with Avi Zinger in order to make sure that they would still have some kind of influence on some things in the future.
Is it okay? Is it kosher to eat Ben & Jerry's again? I know many Jews boycotted
In
it.
Israel, you should definitely eat Ben & Jerry's. Avi Zinger and the Ben & Jerry's in Israel, he is a hero. I think everyone in Israel should support Ben & Jerry's. In the United States, because the board is, only reluctantly come around to it, I will still withhold judgment there. It might make more sense to support Unilever and eat some of their other flavors like Talenti or others, until the board really comes around on its own.
The board gets dissolved, because I don't think those Ben & Jerry, those other, I don't know what to call them. I wouldn't call them human beings, but they're self-hating Jews. Ben & Jerry's self-hating Jews, that's for sure. But they're not going to come around so quickly as far as Israel is concerned. So by buying Ben & Jerry's in America, we're still supporting them somehow, I guess, even though it's owned by Unilever, but they have some control, limited control, but they have some control. So maybe there are other brands that we can use in the interim.
What's really sad is that I don't think they understand or appreciate that the BDS movement is really a hateful, divisive, and anti-Semitic movement whose goal is really to destroy the one and only Jewish state. It's not to improve the quality of life for Palestinians. And in fact, Avi Zinger was engaged in activities that were much more beneficial and helped promote peace than anything that the BDS movement has done. For example, Avi, he supported all sorts of different projects, but one in particular was a program called MEET, which is Middle East Entrepreneurs of Tomorrow. It's a program that's run together with MIT University in Boston. And what it does is it brings together Palestinian and Israeli high school students. The same set of students come together for 3 summers in a row during their high school years to learn and study entrepreneurial skills. And Ben & Jerry's with Avi Zinger was always a major featured part of this program. They would come to visit his factory. They used the Ben & Jerry's business model as a model. He not only spoke to them, but helped judge their kind of final project. And Avi Zinger actually brought the board members of Ben & Jerry's to come and see this program in action. They came to one of the graduation ceremonies where they saw the Arab and Israeli students on the stage together, the families sitting together in the audience. They witnessed how this really brought together the communities, enabled the students to develop friendships and and really move towards coexistence. I mean, that's how you bring about peace between people. And they love this. They totally supported it. And in fact, when their funding, when the meet lost some serious funding and the continuation of the program was in jeopardy, Avi Zinger arranged, Ben & Jerry's gave $100,000 donation to this program. And yet now what they've done is they turned around and turned their back on projects like this. For what? For what? Pulling the support for Avi when he uses, milk and cream and eggs that come from local farmers, including Palestinian farmers, that's not benefiting the Palestinians in the area either. So everything that they are trying to do and everything that they are standing for right now is not the social missions that purports to support, because instead of supporting and helping the Palestinians, they're actually harming and hurting the Palestinians. So, maybe someday they'll realize that.
Wow. We're speaking with Alyza Lewin, and she is an attorney. She works with her father. She's a co-founder and partner of Lewin LLP. She's also president and general counsel of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. And we've been looking at not only Chanukah, menorahs, but also ice cream, Ben & Jerry's. We'll look at anti-Semitism as well. We're going to be right back. Don't go away. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Talkline Network.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
And we're back. Alyza Lewin is our guest. She and her father, Nat Lewin. Lewin & Lewin is a law firm, and she has a finger what's happening in some very important cases that are affecting the Jewish community and beyond. She's also the president and general counsel of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. Let's go to Heshi in Kew Garden Hills. Heshi, you have a question for our guest. Go ahead, Heshi.
Yes, hi. I wanted to know, a good first of all, and a prayer for Chanukah to everyone.
Go ahead. Good Chanukah to you.
Okay. What I want to ask is, my father, who was Mr. About a year, 13 months ago, came from Reich, from Poland, and he knew the Reich Ruv, which was Rav Levine. Was that your great grandfather?
Yes, Rabbi Zecher Tzadik Livracha was the chief rabbi of Rzeszów, was also a member of the Polish Sejm, and he was my great grandfather.
Okay,
that's what I said. Yeah, I know. He used to speak, I think, every Thursday in Warsaw, in Warsaw, right?
Yes, he would travel back and forth because he would go to Warsaw to serve in the Polish government, in the Sejm. And he actually, on the train back and forth, is when he wrote his commentary on Chumash, on Hadrash Ve'ayun. So that's right.
Heshi, you play Jewish geography. You never lose when you play Jewish geography. My rule.
I'm sorry?
I said you never lose when you play Jewish geography. You always find a connection.
Right. Oh, I'm off the air though now? Am I still on the air?
Yes, only have a quick question. Now we're going to move to the next caller.
Yeah, okay.
All right, Heshi, thank you for your phone. What's your question?
I just wanted to say that my father was very impressed. He knew your great grandfather, and I understand that he always was wearing his big day Hasidic clothing, even when he spoke in the Senate, and he spoke a beautiful Polish, I understand.
That's what I have heard, and that's what I understand. He is, when people ask if there's a historic figure that you wish you'd had the opportunity to meet, my answer has always been my great-grandfather. I wish I had the zchut to meet him. It's nice to be able to hear, and I thank you for your sharing your father's recollections.
Heshi, thank you, and have a Freilich Chanukah.
Okay. A good luck, Freilich Chanukah.
That's a nice call, right? To have a family connection, and you never know, people come from, and people always find a way of connecting. So thank you for an interesting call. Okay, we'll continue taking your phone calls, and we're looking at whatever you would talk about Hanukkah and Nowruz. You can talk about ice cream. We're going to look at anti-Semitism and how to combat that. And I know that you've spoken about that, Alyza, and we're going to take some phone calls as well. And you can keep the emails coming at zevbrenner@gmail.com, zevbrenner@gmail.com. And we're happy to entertain your question. Okay, let's go to Stan in Forest Hills. Stan, you have a question for Alyza?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm curious. Tonight I was walking. I live in Forest Hills, Queens, New York. There are two parks, McDonald Park and a smaller park on the other side of Queens Boulevard. It seems that the menorah was put at the front of the park, but not inside the park. And the other menorah, which is in a very tiny, small park, and it's right in the center of the park. In these cases, is it about the location of the menorahs or what? Because I found it to be somewhat ridiculous that this other menorah in a larger park is at the front of it, but not inside when this other one is inside. I mean, who makes these decisions where the menorahs are going to be if that's part of the case?
I'm not sure what the reasoning or the rationale is in that specific location. Usually, though, the decisions are made by the municipality. They may have something to do sometimes with the different safety or security, where the space is that they usually are able to have the groups gather for when they have the lightings. But I don't know. But it's usually what happens is whoever's putting it up makes the request for a permit for the space, and then together with the municipality, they'll give them the permit for whatever that specific location
Yeah, but I
is.
think Sam raised an interesting question. If, let's say, they get permission to put it up, can they, whether it's the city or state or whatever governing body of that particular space is concerned, can they say, okay, we're gonna let you put up a menorah, but you can't put up we'll put you all the way in the back where nobody can really see it? Can they do
Exactly,
that?
right.
Can
right.
they do that?
Yeah.
If the whole park, right, is considered a formal public forum, and the whole space has been used for other events, then they can't, put you to this. Can have what they call time, place, and manner restrictions. So sometimes there are restrictions in terms of certain locations. They can't apply them differently, right, to the religious groups than they do to other groups. But if, for example, there are spaces where you can only have items up, let's say, that don't stay overnight, right? But you have other areas where, okay, a structure can be permitted overnight. So as long as those rules are applied even-handedly to everyone, then they are acceptable. I don't know exactly what the situation was here, but if there are places in the park itself where in the past they've allowed groups to put up structures that stay up overnight, they can't discriminate and say, oh, the religious symbol can't go up there. That makes
Can I
sense?
say something?
Go ahead, Stanley.
Hello?
Yes.
Quickly, I'll take it. The McDonald Park is a major park in Forest Hills where there are sometimes gatherings, meetings, and so forth, political things. But the menorah was put in the front of the park, all the way up front near a particular. It wasn't in the middle of the park, where the other menorah is in a very small park. I mean, very small. I mean, less than maybe 15 or 20 or 30 people sitting in it, and it's right in the middle. And that's where they have usually the. So I'm wondering if they're discriminating and not want to use the major park, because that's where all the major meetings are done. I'm just curious. I don't know.
I don't know the specifics of that, and we would have to find out from the if it's a Chabad menorah, if it's the rabbi who arranged to put it up, what their conversations or their discussions were. I really don't know the
I understand.
details.
Anyway, good question.
Okay,
Sam.
thank you.
Here's an email question from Rose. Why is it so important to have Ben and Jerry's when we can sell Kleins or Mahogany that are just as good and don't do us any favors? First of all, I think that's the United States. You know, in Israel, Avi Zinger had the franchise for many years. What was it, 20 or 30 years? How long did he have the Ben and Jerry's franchise?
He's had, and it wasn't, he's a licensee. He's not even a franchisee. He was a licensee for over 34 years. He brought Ben and Jerry's ice cream to Israel before most people in the United States had even heard of Ben and Jerry's. Numerous hashgachas in Israel, and in fact, what's unique about his Ben and Jerry's in Israel is that he actually koshers his whole factory, his whole plant before Pesach, and so you can actually get kosher Pesach Ben and Jerry's ice cream when you're in Israel. You can't get it in the States, and as a matter of fact, he has a flavor that he created called charoset flavor just for Pesach, and when he introduced it years ago, people in Vermont started getting calls, how do we get the charoset ice cream? And they had to find out, what is charoset in Vermont? And I'm told that they ended up bringing in somebody to try and explain to the plant about the Ashkenazi charoset, the Sephardi charoset, all the different kinds of charoset and what charoset is. But yes, he that's one thing that's unique in Israel.
We should send the Amara brand to the board. let them use it all year long. But by the way, the Charoset brand, did he ever consider shipping some of it to the United States for Pesach? It's because you have companies from Israel that send their product to the United States. Is he allowed to send, let's say, the Charoset flavor to the United States for Pesach?
So right now, with this current arrangement, his jurisdiction is just in Israel. They didn't ask him back then, and I don't think to send it. His intention wasn't to package it to send it, but you know, if they decide it's such a hit that they want to manufacture it, they would have to, you know, if they wanted it to be kosher Pesach, it would have to be made in the Israel factory. The Vermont doesn't.
Does his license, I know he's licensed to Israel. Does he have the right to sell his product in the United States?
Right now, he's just focused on the Israel market.
Okay, so we got to talk to Avi about bringing his Charoset flavor to the United States. It could be an interesting seller for the Pesach season. Now, tell us, by the way, and I know we're going to talk about a little bit about anti-Semitism. Tell us about your work with the Louis D. Brandeis Center.
So the Brandeis Center is an organization that was created a little bit more than 10 years ago to use the law to combat anti-Semitism. We began with a particular focus on the university campuses. It was founded by a civil rights lawyer named Ken Marcus, and I joined the organization about 5 years ago and serve now as its president, as you mentioned. And one of the things that we're seeing, and we've been seeing for years, but now it's gaining much more attention even in mainstream media, is the rise in anti-Semitism, initially on the campuses, but it's spilling out beyond the campuses. But even the Wall Street Journal this week had an article about the anti-Semitism on the campuses, because Jewish students, in particular Jewish students who feel an affinity for Israel, and many of these students are, you know, they are necessarily supportive of all of the policies of the government of Israel, but they feel as part of their, what we call their ancestral and ethnic identity, that Zion is a key component of their Jewish identity, right? They recognize that our Jewish history is rooted in the land of Israel, that you can't separate Jewish identity and Jewish history and Jewish heritage from the land of Israel. That's our ancestral homeland. You know, we pray to return to Israel. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim is what we say. And Jews, and this includes Jews who are from Orthodox or observant homes, as well as Jews who don't come from Orthodox or observant homes, but who still feel very tied to the Jewish people, and that part of belonging to the Jewish people is recognizing that the Jewish people have a right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland. And what's happening to those Jews on campus today is that they're being shunned, they're being marginalized, they're being told, particularly in the progressive spaces, that if they want to be involved, if they want to be active, the first thing they have to do is hide or shed this part of their Jewish identity that is this connection to Israel. And it is what it's causing the students to do is to hide the fact that they're Jewish. So what the Wall Street Journal talked about was students who hide and don't want to show off their Magen David necklaces. But I've heard from students, for instance, who will tell me that they took a trip to Israel and it was life-changing. It was the most amazing experience of their life, but they would never put photographs from that trip up on social media, because if they dare show that they'd been to Israel or that they support Israel, they'll be treated like a pariah on campus. You know, one example, and you can see just the extent of it, is a year ago, a little more than a year ago, at Tufts University, there was a campaign, they call it the Deadly Exchange Campaign. It's a campaign that seeks to blame police brutality in America on Israel and the Jews. They claim, where did law enforcement in the United States learn its aggressive techniques? Oh, they go on these missions to Israel, and the Israelis teach them how to do racial profiling and these aggressive techniques. So at Tufts University, the Students for Justice in Palestine discovered that years ago, there was a Tufts police officer who had gone on one of these missions to Israel. And even though that police officer no longer works at the university, the students decided that they wanted the university to apologize that once upon a time there had been a police officer who had gone on one of these missions. And they wanted the university to promise that in the future, they would never send anybody else. The university never sent anybody, but send anybody else on one of these trips, and that the university would never ever hire somebody who had been on one of these trips to Israel. So, and since we're not only on radio, but also on Zoom, I'll show you this in the picture. The Students for Justice in Palestine created a booklet for this because they managed to get a referendum question put on the ballot at the university, so that all the students, when they were going to elect their student officers, would have to vote on this question: should the university be compelled to make this apology and make these promises? And in the middle of this brochure on this campaign, explaining this whole deadly exchange campaign, they have a map. A map is a map of the area of what is Israel, but Israel doesn't exist on the map. The whole area is labeled as Palestine, and the Negev, right? Israel, 1948 Israel proper, is labeled as occupied territories. Now, one question is, what does this map have to do with the safety and security of students at Tufts University, which is presumably what this whole referendum is supposed to be about? It really has nothing to do with the safety and security of students at Tufts University. But the thing is that this referendum campaign was endorsed by 43 student organizations on campus. The 43 student organizations on campus represented the entire progressive community on campus. All the different minority groups, the LGBTQ groups, the immigration right groups, the climate change groups, and they all signed on to this referendum. And in doing so, they basically endorsed this map. And so the message they were sending to the community at Tufts is, if you want to be on the right side of social justice today, you have to accept this map. In other words, if you want to stand for social or racial justice, you have to believe that Israel as a Jewish homeland has no right to exist. That's a very frightening
It's
thought.
intersectionality where everything is connected. And if you're going to be progressive, you got to be progressive and attack Israel. That's part of that whole grouping. You have to take the whole package. And the package is, if you're for climate change and you're for progressive rights, you have to be anti-Israel. So how do you fight that?
Yeah, and before we get to it, I'll tell you how we fight that. What people have to realize and have to understand is we now have a generation on campus that is being raised to believe that for the world to be a better place, for the world to be a more just place, we have to bring about the end of Israel as a Jewish homeland. And this generation, you have to realize, are going to be our future teachers, our future politicians, our future lawyers, our future judges. Maybe before they get to be judges, they'll be our law clerks, right? Our future journalists. This whole generation is being raised now to believe that to promote justice, you have to oppose the existence of Israel as a Jewish state. So how do you combat this? So what we do on campus is, particularly when you see it getting to the point of exclusion. In other words, Jews are being told you have to choose. If you want to be a member of our club, if you want to be a member of our group, you can't also be a Zionist, right? We've seen this University of Southern California, where there was a movement to impeach the student body vice president purely on the grounds that she was a Zionist. They said, well, if you're a Zionist, you're a racist. And if you're a racist, you're not fit to be a representative of student government. Or we saw it at SUNY New Paltz, where there was a student who created a group to empower survivors of sexual assault. And when she posted on her own personal Instagram page, she shared an infographic by Chen Mazig, which said essentially that Jews are an ethnic group from Israel, and therefore you can't colonize a place that you're from. And her co-chairs at this sexual assault survivor group decided, well, if that's the way you feel about Palestine, then you cannot be part of our sexual assault survivor group, because this means you're an oppressor. And they kicked her out of the club that she had created. They cut off her access to the Google Drive and to the accounts, the social media accounts for the club. Same thing happened at University of Vermont, where a sexual assault survivor group announced that they were blocking Zionists from their Instagram account. There was a book club at UNON, which said that in order to be a member of this book club, you had to commit to being against racism and against Islamophobia and against homophobia and against fat phobia and against anti-Semitism and against Zionism, right? So when you start to see Jewish students actually being excluded in this way, that is harassment and discrimination, discriminating against Jews on the basis of a key component of their Jewish identity. Their Zionism is, right, the Jews' shared ethnicity and ancestry, right? That's when we celebrate our shared ancestry and ethnicity, and to demand that Jews shed that in order to belong, in order to be accepted, is unlawful. And so what we've done is we have filed complaints with the Department of Education that have resulted in the Department of Education opening up investigation to numerous universities: the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, University of Vermont, University of Southern California, Brooklyn College, are all being investigated as a result of complaints that the Brandeis Center filed. Berkeley Law School, just this week, the Office for Civil Rights announced that they were, in the Department of Education, announced that they were invading Berkeley because the Berkeley Law School, 9 student organizations recently announced that they were adopting a bylaw that said that they would not bring in speakers, right, who supported Israel or who were Zionists. This was not that they would not have programs on Israel or Zionism. No, that they would not have speakers who were Zionists, meaning that if you were part of the women's group at Berkeley Law, they would not bring in a speaker on abortion rights, let's say, who happened to be a Zionist, or the queer club at Berkeley Law would not bring in a speaker on gay marriage if that person supported Israel. So this is basically a ban on Jews, because overwhelmingly it's Jews who are Zionists, and banning these Jews from the speaker podiums in these clubs. So now the Department of Education, by opening this investigation, has recognized that this is not a speech issue, that this is a potential discrimination issue if Jews are really being excluded on this basis. And it is yet another step in moving the needle forward to get people to realize that Jews have to be protected today, not only on the basis of religious practice, right? So much of the work my father has done historically is to protect and make sure that Jews can practice their faith freely and with pride. Now we have to make sure that Jews as a people are not pressured to shed this key component of our Jewish identity in order to just engage in society today.
Our guest is Alyza Lewin, President General Counsel of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, also a co-founder and partner in Lewin & Lewin, where she works with her father, the famous Nat Lewin, and protecting Jewish rights, and whether it's anti-Semitism on campus, whether it's the menorah placement, whether it's Ben and Jerry's, they've certainly been in the forefront. We're going to be right back. Don't go away. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
And we're back. Alyza Lewin is our guest. She is co-founder, partner Lewin & Lewin, together with her father Nat Lewin. She's also president, general counsel of Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. Let's go to Avraham in Kensington. Thank you for waiting. Your question for Alyza.
You're welcome. Shavua Tov. During the middle third, I think it was, of the Trump administration, there was talk or plan to extend Title VI protection of the 1964 Civil Rights Act to religious groups. How far did that get, and has it been useful?
So the executive order on combating anti-Semitism was enacted and is still in place. It did not expand Title VI. It brought the understanding of Title VI up to the level of executive order. So just a quick little recap. Actually, back in 2004 was the first time that there was a Dear Colleague letter, and this was Ken Marcus, who actually founded the Brandeis Center, was the one who was at that point serving as the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights in the Department of Education. And he wrote this Dear Colleague letter because what's interesting is Title VI of the Civil Rights Act does not actually include religion as a protected category. It talks about protecting from discrimination on the basis of race, color, national, ethnic origin, and it applies to all entities that receive federal government funds. It means that if you're going to get the federal money, in order to receive the federal money, you may not discriminate. You have to make sure that whatever opportunities you provide are provided equally to all with no discrimination. But as I say, religion is not included in Title VI. So after 9/11, there were members of faith-based groups that were experiencing discrimination and had filed complaints with the Office for Civil Rights, in particular Muslims and Sikhs who were being discriminated against because they were being mistaken as Muslims. And initially, the Department of Education thought, well, maybe we can't even address those complaints because these are coming from faith-based groups and religion is not a protected category. At that point, Ken Marcus wrote this Dear Colleague letter that explained that no, if you have a member of a faith-based group who's being discriminated against on the basis of one of these other characteristics, like their shared ancestry or their ethnic characteristics, they are still protected by Title VI. That was in 2004. In 2010, in the Obama administration, the Department of Justice issued the same understanding. They issued their own letter where they quoted from the 2004 letter, and they said, and this is a quote, "Although Title VI does not prohibit discrimination on the basis of religion, discrimination against Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, and members of other religious groups violates Title VI when that discrimination is based on the group's actual or perceived shared ancestry or ethnic characteristics rather than its members' religious practice." So in 2010, you already had this understanding of Title VI, both by a Republican administration, that was the Bush administration, and a Democratic administration in the Obama administration. What happened in 2019 with the executive order is it elevated these Dear Colleague letters, or what they call sub-regulatory guidance up to the level of an executive order. It adopted this same understanding, but it also linked Title VI to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. So it said, when you get complaints that allege that there's discrimination against Jews, how are you going to know what anti-Semitism is? We're going to look to this IHRA, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. That executive order is still in effect. There's still active guidance on the Department of Education website regarding that executive order. And so what it means is that when universities discriminate against Jews on the basis of their shared ancestry and ethnicity, it is covered by Title VI, and the IRA definition applies. And it's a very useful and important tool for us when we now work to try and combat this anti-Semitism that we see on campus.
Avram, thank you for a good question. Now, isn't there one of the campuses around the country where they clear themselves a Jew-free zone?
So that was
that, and what's happening with that?
That's at Berkeley Law School. So what happened is after these, as I mentioned earlier, the organizations, the student organizations that said that they were not going to include speakers that supported Zionism or supported Israel, Ken Marcus wrote an op-ed where he said that now basically what you had were these Jew-free zones. That op-ed went viral. Barbara Streisand tweeted it, and it went around the world. I mean, we've heard from people in South Africa and Europe, and so the focus that really highlighted what was going on and part of this problem, which is that Jews are being excluded here in Berkeley. They're being denied the opportunity, the speaker's podium, right? These groups have said Jews aren't welcome. Now, by extension, you have to think about, well, what is that? What message does that send to the Jewish students, right? These groups that adopted these bylaws also committed as part of the bylaws to get educated on Palestine, which required them to go to this Palestine 101 class. At the Palestine 101 class, they denigrated Israel, denied the right of Jewish self-determination, made any students who supported Israel feel like they should be shunned. And so what happens now to student members of these clubs and these groups? They're certainly don't feel welcome to express this part of their Jewish identity in these clubs, knowing that these clubs have said Zionist speakers aren't welcome. So that's now, just this week, the Department of Education announced that they are opening up an investigation of Berkeley because of the complaint that was filed. They said, I actually have that letter. They are looking into the issue that they're investigating is, quote, whether the university failed to respond appropriately when they were put on notice, right, from Jewish law students, faculty, and staff that they experienced a hostile environment at the law school based on their shared Jewish ancestry when university recognized student organizations passed a bylaw against inviting speakers who support Zionism, the state of Israel, and the occupation of Palestine, quote unquote. That was the bylaw.
And you mentioned a few minutes ago, Brooklyn College. You would think that in a place like New York, you wouldn't see this kind of activity. So what's happening at Brooklyn College? And you have so many Jewish students that go there. Maybe it was more years ago, but still it's very heavily Jewish population. So why, let's see what's going on there. Why is it taking place?
So at Brooklyn College, the complaint that we filed related to students who were in a master's program for mental health professionals. And what was happening there is that the Jewish students, this is a form of anti-Semitism now that we're seeing increasingly, which has been called erasive anti-Semitism. In other words, when Jewish students try to describe or identify as Jewish, not as white. In other words, they say Jews have experienced anti-Semitism. Jews are a people who have a history, right? A shared culture, and when they try and express that, that's not only denied, but they're told that they are they're then denigrated, and the traditional anti-Semitic tropes, right, the allegations of Jewish power and Jewish control are what's thrown back at them. So we saw this. It was very similar to a complaint that we also filed involving mental health professionals at Stanford University. So at Brooklyn College, what had happened is the students in this program were asked, for example, to rank their identity. And if they ranked Jewish above white, the students in the class attacked them for that. The professors were critical of it. At Stanford, you actually had in the mental health group of the mental health professionals, they created a rate. They divided them into affinity groups. This is part of the diversity, equity, inclusion training, and they put all the Jewish faculty into a white-based. It was called the white affinity group, where they were supposed to be delving into kind of self-analysis of their white privilege and power. And when there were actual acts of anti-Semitism on the campus, so for example, at Stanford, there had been a Zoom bombing where there were swastikas as part of the images, as well as anti-Black racist images. The group made a definite, determined decision to only discuss the anti-Black racist images and not to discuss the swastikas. And when the mental health professionals who were part of this said, well, what about the anti-Semitism? They were told, no, we're not discussing anti-Semitism because Jews are powerful, they're privileged. We need to only discuss, right, the anti-Black racism. We're not going to discuss. And on other occasions also where there was anti-Semitism on the campus, they refused to address it. So what's happening is that these groups are now erasing Jewish identity. They're refusing to recognize Jews as an ethnicity, right? They insist that Jews are only a religious identity with a refusal to acknowledge, for instance, the Jewish history in Israel, right? Our 3,000-year-old history in Israel. They erase that. They deny that it exists. They deny that Jews that there's a history of anti-Semitism, that Jews have experienced persecution over the centuries. All of that is erased. And instead, Jews are told, no, you are white, you are the oppressors, you are powerful, you are privileged. So it reinforces the anti-Semitic tropes while denying Jewish identity, and ends up fostering a hostility towards Jews in these programs that are ostensibly designed to try and sensitize people to different ethnicities and different communities.
Where's the outrage from the Jewish community, let's say in Brooklyn College? In other words, with all these Jewish students that are there, wouldn't you think that they would speak out and protest and make a lot of noise? So I'm hearing it from you. I haven't really seen much about it elsewhere.
I think students are afraid. Students are very afraid to speak up. Students are afraid that if they speak up and they support those who are experiencing this, that they too will be marginalized and shunned and excluded. And what society has to understand is that anti-Semitism is not just a Jewish problem, right? Historically, we've seen that the community where anti-Semitism spreads and flourishes, that easily and destroys the society, because at its heart, anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory. It's a lie. And oops, I lost my connection here. Hold on. There we go. And so what happens is the non-Jews, right? This needs to be a concern for our entire society. And so when Jews try to point out the anti-Semitism they're experiencing, it's really important for society to want to listen and want to hear that in order to preserve all the values that we as a society hold dear, right? The problem and the difficulty that people have recognizing anti-Semitism, I think, is because anti-Semitism morphs in each generation. It looks a little different. But the most important thing I think that people need to understand is that the one constant about anti-Semitism is it always takes whatever is that generation's evil, whatever that society views as its misfortune, and it pins it on the Jew. The Jew becomes the scapegoat. So whether the Jew has been blamed over the centuries as the Christ killer, the capitalist, the Marxist, the cause of disease. For the Nazis, who wanted a pure Aryan race, the Jews were viewed as the race polluter. They certainly weren't viewed as white. And today, why are all Jews suddenly labeled as white? Because today, white is the evil. White is the oppressor. And so today's generation, which views racism, apartheid, settler colonialism as our greatest evil, then the Jew must be the cause of that.
The
Jew is
culprit.
to blame. The Jew is the culprit. And you take it one step further when you realize that today, what is Israel? Israel's the Jewish collective. Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. And so Israel becomes, as Erwin Cutler has said, right, the Jew of the nations. Because what happens is then when there are folks in the world who try to decide, well, which country is it that's the world's worst offender when it comes to human rights violations, right? Today's evil, human rights violations, they don't blame China with the Uyghurs or Russia with Ukraine or Iran. No, they turn around and they say it's the Jewish country. It's that Jewish nation that's the worst offender when it comes to today's greatest evils of racism, apartheid, settler colonialism. That is a contemporary form of anti-Semitism, and yet most people today don't recognize it yet as
They
anti-Semitism.
tolerate it. Our guest is Alyza Lewin. Lewin and Lewin. We're going to be right back. Don't go away. Stay tuned. Network.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. Our final stretch with Alyza Lewin, President and General Counsel of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. She's also a co-founder and partner with her father in Lewin & Lewin LLP. You know, when I spoke, Alyza, to Alan Dershowitz about anti-Semitism, what we can do, one of the things that he said was that when they have these criminals, because a lot of them get away with it, they end up getting arrested and don't really serve any jail time or really get punished for it. So he says we should really be suing them. It's a great idea, but I don't think we can be suing every single anti-Semite. But what do you think about that idea?
Yes, depending upon, the individual case, if it's possible to bring individual suits, I think that's right. I think, for the harm that they've caused, that is one way to try and make sure that there's some measure of justice. It's not always easy, but some of the cases, if they're particularly egregious, I definitely think I support that idea.
No, I like the idea of bankrupting them, but some of them don't have any money. So that's why I'm not sure how it would work in some of the cases. But we do see this problem of anti-Semitism. And as you correctly point out, Alyza, intersectionality, where all the progressive causes link it in and they hide behind the anti-Zionist facade. But we all know that it's a Jew hatred that's taking place. In your years of practice, is this one of the worst years we're seeing for the growth of anti-Semitism in this country? I would suspect during World War II, when you had neo-Nazi groups marching and we had Nazi groups marching in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, you had anti-Semitic organization. Maybe it was worse then, but it's pretty bad today.
It's definitely increasing. The bad news, right, is that it's increasing, and it's increasing so much that mainstream media has even started to pay attention to it. But the good news by the same time is that mainstream media is starting to pay attention to it, because you can't even begin to try and expect society to combat a problem that they don't even recognize exists. And so the fact that it has reached a level where the mainstream is starting to talk about it, I think is actually a positive development, because now I think the real work of trying to address it can begin. When I started at the Brandeis Center 5 years ago, you didn't hear people talking about particularly the anti-Semitism that's masked as anti-Zionism. You didn't hear people talking about it or recognizing it as all as anti-Semitism. Today, you hear Jewish students on campus talking about how they're being excluded and targeted on the basis of their Zionism, which for them, they view as an integral component of their Jewish identity. And so they're talking about how they're being shunned and marginalized because they're Jews. They're being shunned and marginalized on the basis of this key component of their Jewish identity. That's essential for us to be able to use the legal tools, because the legal tools are designed to protect and make sure that Jews are not discriminated against on the basis of their Jewish identity.
Now, there
And
is one area where Jews are being discriminated against, and I know the Asian students have a lawsuit regarding this, but there's a new code word in written colleges where they want diversity. So they don't say they don't want Jews. And I've actually had calls to Columbia and also to NYU. They didn't respond. And I said that we're doing a research on this issue. But under the name of diversity, they said we can't have too many New York people. We got to have from all parts of the country. But that also, in practicality, it means a way of excluding Jews. I think they're getting away with it as far as Jews. I know with Asians, there was a lawsuit that in front of the Supreme Court regarding that. But I'd like to look at that. That's another way of discrimination and trying to get Jews from out of these colleges, especially like Columbia and Barnard, NYU, et cetera.
it does. There's a book by David Bernstein about kind of the new woke anti-Semitism. And his point is that this whole push and the way the diversity, equity, inclusion programs, it works to harm Jews. There's no doubt about it. And it's because there's this refusal to recognize Jews as an ethnic group, right? There's this insistence that Jews are all white, that Jews are all powerful, that Jews are all privileged. And it's denying and erasing the Jews' lived experience. It's a denying and erasing the Jews' identity as a ethnic, cultural, denying our ethnic, cultural, ancestral identity. And it's very damaging. It's insisting that everybody else has the right to describe and have their identities honored, except for the Jews. And that when the Jews try to talk about their ancestral ethnic identity and they try and educate the world, they're just silenced. They're shut down, and they're told that if they raise that, just raising that, trying to talk about it, renders them racist, renders them worthy of condemnation. It's an extremely difficult spot for Jews to be in, and it's something that the Jews have to push back against.
What do
and they
we
have to-
do? Because I know you're taking the leadership and you're suing Variety, but where's everybody else? Where's the ADL? Where the other Jewish civil rights group? This it's nothing to do with religious identity. If you're Orthodox, conservative, Reform, this is the basic Jewish identity. Where is everybody?
I think they've been very slow to understand how to articulate and how to talk about it and how to push back. They've been very slow. They've been so focused on recognizing what I call the anti-Semitism that looks like the Nazis, right? The white supremacists, the Nazis, the swastikas, that they recognize as anti-Semitism, that the general public recognizes as anti-Semitism, because the Holocaust was such a defining moment and people now know it. But the modern contemporary form of anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism today that is targeting Jews on the basis of our shared peoplehood, our shared Zionism, our shared connection and pride in our shared ancestry and ethnicity and our connection to the land of Israel, that is a form of anti-Semitism that we need to push back against. And we need to say,
They're not pushing back because it's coming from the left.
I think that is a real reason why people are afraid to push back, and we can't be. We have to say to the left, if you truly believe and support the idea of inclusivity for all, then it cannot be that every identity group is welcome with their full identity at the table except for the Jews. It cannot be, if you want a place that is truly inclusive, that the only group that you're saying may not bring its full identity to the table are the Jews. And that's what's happening today. And it's immoral. It's unacceptable. And people from right to left, from left to right, should all recognize that and should say, if we want a truly inclusive society that celebrates diversity, Jews have to be included with their full identity.
Agreed. Alyza Lewin, thank you for your leadership on this matter. Thank you to your father. I know you're a great team, Lewin and Lewin LLP, together with Nat Lewin. You're also president of the General Counsel of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. Thank you for being here with us, and look forward to having you back and continued success. Keep on fighting. Unfortunately, you're going to be kept busy for a very long time. I hate to break the news to you, right?
Thank you. Yes. Well, we'll keep fighting. We will definitely keep fighting.
Regards to your folks from us.
Thank you very much, and a happy Chanukah.
Happy Hanukkah to you and your family. Alyza Lewin here on the Talkline Network.